Hi guys, welcome back to the channel Most Highly Guided. My name is Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me again. I am currently uploading the most recent video, so that should be up soon. So hopefully it doesn't affect the recording. I live in a village, so the signal is not always the best. The internet's not always the best. So we pray that it doesn't interfere with my recording. So we are doing chapter 5 of Beyond Death's Door. All the other chapters are on here, guys, if you want to go take a look at them. And let's get on and do this, guys. I know we're reading multiple books. We're reading this one. We're reading The Vessel of Honor. We're also reading Return of the Gods, which I uploaded 2 days ago. So there is plenty of things, or hopefully, what do you call them? They're basically completely different books for completely different things. So if one doesn't interest you, I'm sure one of the others will. So please feel free to go check them out. And let's get this chapter done then, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. So, strange encounters of the last kind. Life after death can be either the enigma or the hope of mankind. Recent on-the-scene interviews of patients returning from clinical death who have experienced transitions into another life reveal that good and bad reports are about equally divided in number. One patient may recall death as wonderful and edifying, while another may suppress his experience because of its destructive and embarrassing nature. We shall present some of the good and the bad and the odd after-death encounters in the next several chapters, but before discussing some strange encounters, both past and present, let's review a typical out-of-the-body experience. Typical out-of-the-body experience. The following is an aggregate example from which several variations may occur. A dying person simply faints or painlessly loses consciousness as death occurs, and yet he is still able to hear himself pronounced dead by his doctor. He then discovers that he is out of his own body but still in the same room, looking on as a bystander and observing the procedures. He watches himself being resuscitated and frequently is compelled to walk around other people who might be obstructing his view. Or he may look down upon the scene from a floating position near the ceiling, in which he sometimes finds himself. Often he is standing or floating behind the doctor or the nurse, looking down on the back of their heads as they work to revive his body. He notices who is in the room and knows what they are saying. He has difficulty believing that he is dead, that the lifeless body used to be his. He feels fine. The body has been vacated as if it were a strange object. After he becomes more accustomed to this odd condition, he notices that he has a new body which seems real and endowed with superior senses. He is not a ghost. He can see and feel and think and talk just as before, but now fringe benefits have been added. He notices his body has infinite capabilities of transportation and thought reading, and is capable of doing almost anything. He may then hear a peculiar noise, after which he finds himself moving through a long dark passage with walls. His speed may be fast or slow, but he doesn't touch the walls and is not afraid of falling. As he emerges from the tunnel, he may see a brilliantly lighted environment of exquisite beauty, where he meets and talks with friends and relatives who have previously died. He may then be interviewed by a being of light or being of darkness. This environment may be inexpressibly wonderful, frequently a rolling meadow or a beautiful city, or it may be inexpressibly horrible, frequently a dungeon or huge cave. His whole life may be played back in an instant review of all the major events of his life, as if anticipating a judgment. As he walks along with his friends or relatives, frequently experiencing good experience. A barrier is usually encountered beyond which he cannot go and still return. He usually is turned back at this point and suddenly finds himself back in his body, where he may feel the shock of an applied electric current or chest pains from someone pushing upon his chest. These experiences usually affect a person's life and attitudes profoundly. If the experience is pleasant, one is not afraid to die again. A person might look forward to renewing his experience whereof he left off, especially since he has discovered that death itself is painless and presents no fear. If he tries to tell his friends about his experience, he may receive ridicule or quips. Finding the words to describe these unearthly episodes is difficult enough, but if ridiculed, he may keep the episode a secret and say no more. Nice. If it is unpleasant, an experience of damning incrimination, he may prefer to leave the story untold. The terrifying experiences may be as abundant as the pleasant ones. As with those who have had good experiences, those reporting bad experiences may have trouble realizing they are dead. as they watch people work on their dead bodies. They may also enter a dark passage after leaving the room, but instead of emerging into bright surroundings, they enter a dark, dim environment where they encounter grotesque people who may be lurking in the shadows or along a burning lake of fire. The horrors defy description and are difficult to recall. Compared to a pleasant experience, exact details are difficult to obtain. It is important to interview people who have died immediately upon resuscitation, while they're still in trouble and calling for help, and before experience can be forgotten or concealed. These strange negative encounters even more profoundly affect their future life and their views of death. I have not seen one such person remain agnostic or an atheist. Personal observations. Let me tell you how I began my study of life after death experiences. I began following published reports of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, finally compiled in her book on death and dying, and Dr. Raymond Moody's reports in Life After Life. Except for cases of attempted suicide, all of their published reports presented unbelievably good experiences. I can't believe this. Their case reports were too pleasant, too euphoric to be true, I thought. As a youth, I'd been taught there was a good place and a bad place, a heaven and a hell. After the experience of resuscitating a man who said he was in hell and my subsequent belief in scriptural truth, I assumed that some would go to the bad place, but almost all of these case reports spoke only of a good place. It then occurred to me that some of the good experiences could have been false impressions, perhaps created by Satan appearing as an angel of light. See 2 Corinthians 11:14. Or perhaps the meeting place is a pleasant environment representing a sorting ground or a prejudgment area, since most cases report a barrier that prevents progress into the beyond. The patient returns to his body before the barrier can be traversed. However, a few unusual cases report that they were allowed to break through that barrier into what appeared to be heaven or hell. These will be described later. As a result of these observations, I am convinced that all of the cases published by Dr. Raymond Moody and Dr. Kubler-Ross, subsequently by Drs. Carlis Osis and Erlender Haraldsson in their excellent collection At the Hour of Death, are accurately reported by the authors but not always completely recalled or reported by the patients. I have found that most of the bad experiences are soon suppressed deeply into the patient's subliminal or subconscious mind. These bad experiences seem to be so painful and disturbing that they are removed from conscious recall, so that only the pleasant experience or no experience at all are recollected. There have been cases of the patient dying several times, with the heart stopping whenever resuscitation was interrupted and consciousness was restored as breathing and heartbeat resumed. The patient in these instances may have had several out-of-body experiences. However, he will usually remember only the pleasant details. It then occurred to me that Dr. Kubler-Ross or Dr. Moody and other psychiatrists and psychologists were interviewing patients who had been resuscitated by other doctors several days to several weeks previously. Neither Kubler-Ross nor Moody, so far as I know, has ever resuscitated a patient or had the opportunity of recording immediate on-the-scene interviews. After many interrogations of patients I have personally resuscitated, I was amazed by the discovery that many have bad experiences. If patients could be immediately interviewed, I believe researchers would find bad experiences to be as frequent as good ones. However, most doctors, not wanting to be identified with spiritual beliefs, are afraid to question patients about their after-death experiences. This concept of immediate interviewing was suggested many years ago by a famous psychologist, Dr. W.H. Myers, who stated, "It is possible that we might learn much upon questioning dying persons on their awakening from some comatose condition as to their memory of any dream or vision during this state. If there has, in fact, been any such experience, it should be at once recorded, as it will probably fade rapidly from the patient's supraliminal memory, even if he does not die directly afterwards." At the onset of my study, I began contacting other doctors who have had similar good and bad experiences reported to them so that sufficient authenticated cases could be compared. At the same time, I started exploring case reports from the past. Strange encounters from the past. In reviewing the literature, I found that the King James Bible presented a case somewhat suggestive of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in 2 Kings 4:34. And although centuries old, the Tibetan Book of the Dead had its first known recording in the 8th century, and the fascinating similarity of ancient concepts to the present-day experience is truly remarkable. Descriptions are similar concerning the soul's existence outside the physical body, and how the soul has the same bodily senses, only further enhanced and intensified. Travel of the soul is also described as instantaneous, arriving anywhere by thought, going through walls, rocks, or other objects without resistance. In a brilliant environment of pure light, it was believed that the soul would meet relatives who had previously died. The soul would then be judged, subsequently serving a penalized existence or other appropriate fate. Next, I examine the reports of Emanuel Swedenborg, a prolific Swedish writer living in the early 1700s. In his original reports, Swedenborg described his personal experiences while outside his body as he himself went through early events of death. During his state of insensibility, he perceived and retained in memory the things which occurred and which occur to those who are sustained from the dead. The process of the spirit being disengaged from the body. First he met inquiring angels and spirits who conversed in a universal language where the speech of an angel or spirit flows first into the man's thought. He noticed his body was still recognized by his friends and by those whom he had known in the world. Wherefore they are instructed by their friends concerning the state of eternal life. All of the things he had spoken and done were made manifest before the angels in a light that is clear as day. And there is nothing so concealed in the world that is not manifest after death. More meaningful to me, however, is the detailed report of a physician who, in 1889, went 4 hours without recorded pulse and 30 minutes without detectable respiration during a coma produced by fulminating typhoid fever. This was recorded in November 1889 issue of the St. Louis Medical and Surgical Journal concerning a Dr. Wilay of Skiddy, Kansas, treated by a Dr. S.H. Raines. After Dr. Raines noticed that the gasping respirations of the previous hours had ceased for a full 30 minutes, and that the patient had been without detectable heartbeat for 4 hours, he was pronounced dead, and the village church bell was tolled. Recalling his own death, Dr. Wilay recorded, I came again into a state of conscious existence and discovered that I was still in my body, but that the body I had no longer any interest in common. I looked in astonishment and joy for the first time upon myself, with all the interest of a physician. I beheld the wonders of my bodily anatomy. Realizing that he was the living soul of that dead body, he reasoned that I have died, as men termed death, and yet I am as much a man as ever. I am about to get out of the body. I watched the interesting process of the separation of soul and body. I recollect distinctly how I appeared to myself, something like a jellyfish as regards colour and form. His spirit was immersed, and I floated up and down, literally like a soap bubble attached to the bowl of a pipe until I was last broke loose from the body, where I slowly rose and expanded into the full stature of a man. I seemed to be translucent, of a bluish cast, and he turned to leave the room. His elbow came into contact with the arm of one or two gentlemen who were standing in the door. To my surprise, his arm passed through mine without apparent resistance. The severed parts closing again without pain or it reunites. It looked quickly up at his face to see if he had noticed the contact, but he gave me no sign, only stood and gazed towards the couch I just left. I directed my gaze in the direction of his and saw my own dead body. It was lying just as I had taken so much pains to place it, partially upon the right side, and feet close together and the hands clasped across the breast. I was surprised at the paleness of the face. I saw a number of persons sitting and standing about the body, and particularly noticed 2 women apparently kneeling by my left side, and I knew they were weeping. I have since learned that they were my wife and sister. I now attempted to gain the attention of people with the object of comforting them as well as assuring them of their own immortality. I bowed to them playfully and saluted with my right hand. I passed about among them also, but found that they gave no heed. Then the situation struck me as humorous, and I laughed outright. I concluded the matter by saying to myself, they see only with the eyes of the body. They cannot see spirits. They are watching what they think is I, but they are mistaken. That is not I. This is I, and I am much alive as ever. How well I feel, I thought. Only a few minutes ago I was horribly sick and distressed. Then came that change called death, which I have so much dreaded. This has passed now, and here I am. I still a man, alive and thinking. Yes, thinking as clearly as ever, and how well I feel. I shall never be sick again. I have no more to die. And in sheer exuberance of spirits, I danced a figure and then turned about and looked in at the open door, where I could see the head of my body in a line with me. He then described himself as being lifted and gently propelled through the air by someone's hands and placed on some road in the sky, upon which he walked into 3 prodigious rocks blocking the road. At which sight I stopped, wondering why so fair a road should be thus blocked. And while I considered what I was to do, a great and dark cloud, which I compared to a cubic acre in size, stood over my head. I was aware of a presence which I could not see, but which I knew was entering into the cloud from the southern side. The presence did not seem to my mind as a form, because it filled the cloud like some vast intelligence, as the cloud rested lightly upon either side of my head, thoughts not my own entered into my brain. These, I said, are his thoughts and not mine. They might be in Greek or Hebrew for all the power I have over them, but how kindly am I addressed in my mother tongue, so that I may understand. All is well. And this being told me, this is the road to the eternal world. Yonder rocks are the boundary between the 2 worlds and the 2 lives. Once you pass them, you can no more return into the body. If your work is complete on earth, you may pass beyond the rocks. If, however, upon consideration you conclude that it is not done, you can return to the body. I was tempted to cross the boundary line. Now that I am so near, I wanted to cross the line and stay, and advance the left foot across the line. As I did so, a small, densely black cloud appeared in front of me and advanced towards my face. I knew that I was to be stopped. I felt the power move or to think leaving me. My hands felt powerless at my side. My head dropped forward and the cloud touched my face, and I knew no more. Without previous thought and without apparent effort on my part, my eyes opened. I looked at my hands and then the little white cot upon which I was lying, and realised that I was in my body. And in astonishment and disappointment I exclaimed, "What in the world has happened to me? Must I die again?" I was extremely weak, but strong enough to relate the above experience. Despite all injunctions to be quiet, I made a rapid and good recovery. There are plenty of witnesses to the truth of the above statement, in so far as my physical condition is concerned. Also to the fact that just as I described the conditions about my body in the room, so they actually were. I must therefore have seen things by some means. How he survived without apparent vital functions for a full 30 minutes is beyond me. Only a few cases have illustrated both the contemplation of death and the death experience itself. One of these involved Dwight Moody, a shoe salesman of Chicago, who became one of the greatest evangelists in Christian history. On a hot sunny day in New York in August 1899, he said, "Someday you will read in the papers that Moody is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. At that moment I shall be more alive than I am now. I was born of the flesh in 1837, and I was born of the spirit in 1855. That which is born of the flesh may die. That which is born of the spirit shall live forever." Later that year, Moody was near death. On a winter morning, Friday, December the 22nd, 1899, his son Will said he heard Moody in his room across the hall saying, "Earth recedes, heaven opens before me." Will hurried to his father's room. Moody says, "This is no dream, Will. It is beautiful. It's like a trance. If this is death, it is sweet. God is calling me and I must go. Don't call me back." Then he began to slip into unconsciousness, complaining of no pain, calling it bliss. After the labours of his physician, Moody came to and wanted to know where everyone was. He said he had been out of the world. "I went to the gate of heaven. Why, it was so wonderful, and I saw the children." When asked who he saw, he said, "I saw Irene and Dwight." Then he realised he was near the end and said, "I will stay as long as I can, but if my time is come, I am ready. If God wishes he could work a miracle, I will get up, doctor. I can die in a chair just as well as in bed, can't I?" Moody then received his signal for eternity. Nothing need keep him, he said. The chariot was in the room. Thus Dwight Moody first contemplated death and then temporarily experienced death, to return after seeing his deceased children and heavenly sights. He died subsequently with apparent serenity and anticipation. Another historical example of life after death involved a pioneer in psychoanalysis, Dr. Carl Jung. He described finding himself in a state of semi-consciousness after a heart attack. The description suggests a transient cardiac arrest. After Exiting his body, he found himself floating away from Earth in a glorious blue light, and later standing before a temple, the door of which was surrounded by a wreath of flames. He wrote, "It's impossible to convey the beauty and intensity of emotion during these visions. They were the most tremendous things I have ever experienced. I can describe the experience as only ecstasy of a contemporary state in which the present, past, and future are one." He did not describe a barrier or judgment. Perhaps he didn't stay long enough. Other reported experiences of death or near death in the past include those of Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin, Elizabeth Browning, Eddie Rickenbacker, and also observations and thoughts of such writers as Louisa May Alcott and Ernest Hemingway. Strange encounters from the present. Some of my patients have demonstrated astounding powers of recall, accurately reconstructing the events that occurred during the resuscitation, exactly recalling which procedures we used and describing what each person said in the room and what type and colour of clothes each one wore. Several other visualized events suggest a spiritual existence outside the body during the time of a prolonged unconsciousness. Excuse me, guys. Such states of coma sometimes lasting several days. One such patient was a nurse. At the hospital one day, I asked to see her in consultation about her heart because of complaints of recurrent chest pains. She was not in her room. Excuse me. But her roommate said she was either in an X-ray department or was still in the bathroom. Sorry, guys. Whew. I knocked on the bathroom door, hearing no response. I swung the door open very slowly, hoping not to embarrass anyone who might be there. As the door swung open, there was a nurse hanging from the coat hook on the back of the bathroom door. She was not very large, so she swung easily with the door opening and suspended from the coat hook by a soft collar used for neck sprains. Apparently, she had attached this collar around her neck and then fastened the edge of it over the hook, gradually bending her knees until unconsciousness occurred. No suffocation or choking, just a gradual fainting. The more that faintness occurred, the more she slumped. At death, her face, tongue, and eyes were bulging and swollen. Her face had dark bluish tinge. The rest of her body had death pallor. She had long since stopped breathing. I quickly unhooked her and laid her full length on the floor. Her pupils were dilated. There was no pulse in her neck and no heartbeat could be heard with my ear to the chest. I started external heart resuscitation while her roommate ran down the hall to get help from the nursing staff. Oxygen and breathing masks were substituted for mouth-to-mouth ventilation. The electrocardiogram showed straight-line standstill. No electric shock would have helped. Intravenous sodium bicarbonate and epinephrine were given directly in repeated doses while other drugs were added to the intravenous bottle. Continuous drip infusion of medicines were given to support the blood pressure and help correct the shock. She was then taken to intensive care unit by stretcher, where she remained in a coma for 4 days. Because of the dilated pupils, it appeared that the brain damage had occurred from inadequate circulation during the period of heart arrest. Surprisingly, though, after a few hours, her blood pressure started returning to normal. The urine output increased as adequate circulation of blood was restored, but it was several days before she was able to speak. She eventually regained all of her faculties and returned to work several months later. To this day, she believes she'd been in some sort of automobile accident that caused her neck to be sore for so long. Whereas she entered the hospital with severe depression, she now recovered with no residual depression or suicidal tendency, apparently occurred by a prolonged period when the brain had no blood supply. About the second day after recovery from her coma, I asked her if she remembered anything at all. She said, "Oh, I remember you working on me. You took off your plaid brown coat and threw it on the floor, and then you loosened your tie. I also remember that your tie had white and brown stripes on it. The nurse who came to help you looked so worried. I tried to tell her I was all right. You told her to go and get an ambubag and also an intracath to start an IV. Then the 2 men came in with a stretcher. I remember all of that." Recall with me, she was in a deep coma at the particular time and remained in a coma another 4 days. At the time I took off my brown plaid coat, only she and I were in the room and she was clinically dead. Some who survive irreversible death have total recall of any conversation in the room that took place during their resuscitation. Perhaps this is because hearing is one of the last senses to leave the body in death. I don't know, but I should have been more careful in the following case. An elderly gentleman, 73 years old, came into the office complaining of crushing mid-chest pain. He was holding his chest as he walked toward my office. He fell midway down the hall, his head hitting the wall as he fell. He sputtered a breath once or twice and then quit breathing. His heart had already stopped. We pulled his shirt up and listened to his chest to make sure. Artificial breathing and artificial heartbeat were begun mechanically. The electrocardiogram was attached and showed ventricular fibrillation. Each time we applied electric shock through the paddles, the body jumped in response. Afterwards, he would arouse, fight us off, climb halfway to his feet, and then suddenly fibrillate again and fall to the floor, often striking his head again. This happened about 6 times. Oddly enough, on the 6th time, after several other intravenous supporting medications were given, the shocking procedure held and effective pulse was maintained. Blood pressure was restored, consciousness recovered, and the patient is living today. He's 81 years old. He got married again following his incident and subsequently managed to get divorced, losing his fruit stand in the bargain, his primary means of livelihood. Of the 6 reoccurrences of clinical death he experienced in my office that day, he recalls only one thing. He recalls me telling the other doctor working on me, "We'll try one more time. If the shock doesn't hold this time, let's quit." I wish I hadn't said that because he heard me even though he was completely unconscious at the time. Later he said to me, "What did you mean we'll quit? That was me you was working on." Hallucinations. Oftentimes people are asked me if these good and bad experiences might not represent hallucinations induced by the severity of the patient's illness or by drugs administered during that illness. Wouldn't it be more likely, for instance, that people see what they wish to see in their visions? Perhaps they are influenced by cultural or religious training. Are the reported experiences truly universal or only visions? Do people with different religious backgrounds, for instance, have similar or dissimilar experiences? In response to this problem, Dr. Carlos Osis and his associates initiated 2 studies in America and 1 in India. Questionnaires were received from over 1,000 doctors and nurses who were particularly exposed in their work by dying patients, and the following results were recorded. 1. Those patients taking either sedatives or drugs that are known to produce hallucinations were less likely to have after-death experiences than those who took no medications at all. Drug-induced hallucinations, moreover, characteristically pertain to the present world and not to visions of another world existence. Illnesses that produce hallucinations such as uremia, chemical poisoning, or brain damage are associated with less encounters with an afterlife or its components than are other diseases. Patients having experiences in afterlife did not see heaven or hell in the form they had previously conceived. What they did see was usually unexpected. These visions did not appear related to wishful thinking and did not seem to determine which patients would have the experiences. Such visions or experiences would appear as frequently to a patient who had all expectations of recovery as those who knew they were dying. The sequence of the experience was not altered by a difference in culture and religion. Dying patients in the United States and in India both claim to see this dark passage, bright light, and relatives previously deceased. It should be noticed, however, that religious background definitely influenced identification of any being that might have been encountered. No Christian saw a Hindu deity and no Hindu saw Jesus. The being does not seem to identify himself but is instead identified by an observer. Dr. Charles Garfield, Assistant Professor of Psychology at the University of California Medical Center, concludes from this observation that the whole quality of life after death visions is entirely different from drug-induced hallucinations, or the kind of dissociated sensations that patients in a great deal of pain may experience. My own observations affirm this. Drug effects, alcohol delirium, tremens, carbon dioxide narcosis, and psychotic reactions deal more with objects in the present world and not with situations in the next world. Chapter 6, guys, is Ascending to Heaven. So that'll be interesting. I find this book so interesting. I'm still not sure what I think of it. Like, obviously this is people's experiences and what they remember and recall and stuff, but me, I just keep it simple, like absent from the body, present with the Lord. However that may occur or happen along the way, it's fine because I'm going to be with the Lord. So whether I am standing over watching or, I don't know, I don't really know what to think of this book. It's, I don't know, it's thought-provoking if nothing else. So I do find it really interesting. This one I haven't actually read on my own before. I have, like all the other books I've read previous on my own. haven't done this, so we're literally reading this one together, which I kind of like. So I did the Return of the Gods, guys, the other day. I think it was about 2 days ago, and the next chapter on that is the Metamorphosis of Men. So I'm really, really excited to get that out, hopefully soon. So thank you so much for joining me and for watching. Please go check out my other videos if you like the content on this channel. I do really appreciate it, and I know it's not your average thing to do, sit here reading books, but I find them so interesting, and not everybody can afford to go out and buy the books and waste money. So if I have them on my bookshelf, which I do, I have a whole bookshelf full of books, mostly Christian books. The rest of them are like cooking or crafts or something, because I love these things. Yeah, so I think sharing this information of our brothers and sisters that have gone before us and done such a wealth of research and stuff, then why not share them with each other if it can aid us in our walk with the Lord? So thank you so much for watching, and I will be back soon with the next video. Thank you, guys. Have a blessed day.